Okay, I'm going to do a demonstration of one of the two methods that are integrated into the workbook. The one I'm going to do first in this video is actually the second method, but it's the one that's actually open to everybody. It's actually a little bit more complicated than the first method, but it's open to everyone who has access to the MLS. And so we're going to start there first. I'm going to do this video in uh, sort of a rapid fire fashion. So I'm going to go through everything. I'm going to talk through a little bit, but I'm going to try to go more at the pace that you can expect once you've begun to understand how to use the workbook and how to interpret the results. The interpretation is always the hardest part. That's always where you're going to camp out the longest, is interpreting all the data that you will have available. So with that said, let's go ahead and begin. So this is the workbook. We're starting on this tab. It's called my Flex Model 1 tab. I'll talk to you about why I named it that, but what we need, it's asking for CSV data from our MLS. So let's get that. Okay, I have done a search in my MLS in a geographic area here. I have put some search criteria. I only want sales for the last 1,095 days. I'm narrowing down square footage, year built. I want at least 2-car garages. Um, Plano schools. That's my search for this one. I can have some broad criteria in certain ways. I'm not looking for specific comps. What I'm looking for is a segment of the market that I believe is going to be um, demonstrative of how the market is actually changing in this segment, if it's changing. We don't know yet. So I am going to uh, see the results of that, select them all, and I'm going to export it to a custom export that I have. I'll show you how to create that very soon. I'll go ahead and get myself off the screen at this point because we're going to take that custom export and we're going to put it in this page. So I'm opening up that custom export right now, and there it is. For this particular method, I just want the data. I don't need the headers for this one. So, and I can paste that right there. Now I'm going to filter for a few things. I didn't narrow down maybe as much as I should have in certain criteria. So if there's something that's really unusual in lot size, I might want to either go back and create another custom export or filter that out. So here I've got a couple that the realtor didn't put in the lot size, so I want to get rid of those. And I'm going to get rid of this one that the realtor put in the number of acres instead of the square footage of the lot. So I'm either going to convert that. I could just convert that really quickly and say that's approximately 5,000 square feet. So this would be cleaning up my data a little bit. So I'm going to go down to the bottom of my set, and that one that had a really unusually large lot, I'm just going to delete that one. Same thing, I could of course go in and look at those specific sales to see about their lot size, but I'm just not going to do that. The idea is to be able to do this a little bit more quickly. So I don't want to spend a lot of time cleaning my data. So really, there I could have saved time by adding a search criteria to make sure that it didn't get things that were ridiculously small errors and ridiculously large, something that was highly unusual. Same thing with seller concessions. If I have something that just doesn't make sense, like this one's reporting a $112,000 seller concession, I don't think that's credible. I think that's probably a data entry error. It's probably 11,200. So that's probably what's going on there. So again, I can filter that out. I've got one there that doesn't have a concessions reported one way or the other. I could leave it in or filter it out. So those are things that I can do to clean up my data. Whenever I'm done, so I always want to make the last thing that I do to sort the purchase contract date A to Z. So I want the oldest first in this. I'll explain why later. What else is going on this screen is I've got a model set up to adjust for pools. So I've got pool homes with and without pools in this data set, and I've got a grouped pair model set up to equalize those two groups of properties. That's not necessarily the adjustment that would be supported for that. Again, models like this are a little bit different than adjustments in that a lot of things could be sort of conglomerating in that pool feature, and that's okay. I just want to here try to isolate time. So I'm trying to equalize those two segments of that data. So that's the first thing that I'm doing there. And on this next tab, what I want to do is model for several other features. And my strategy here is going to be to model to my subject property. It doesn't actually have to model to my subject property. The reason being is we're just trying to equalize and put all of our sales data here on an equal footing. So we're isolating the variable of time, and the strategy here is just to use the subject's data and try to match to the subject's data. Again, it doesn't have to work exactly like that. So that's my subject data. Now you can see, I'm gonna change this filtering right now. We'll get to that in a second. What you're seeing is all of the sales data modeled for pools plotted on this chart, so I can see a little bit what's going on. I've got a linear trend line in there that's not there because I'm using that necessarily to measure my change in prices. It's really to help me visually, which will become apparent in a minute. Right now, I'm still trying to, I've filtered in the MLS, and now I'm in my modeling process. I've modeled for pools. Now I want to model for bath count, and how I choose these factors. We can get into a little bit more detail further in the course, and I'm going to leave that particular one at 0. I'm not going to model for year built, and I'll explain why. So as I did that, you saw the data points change in my chart. Actually, the y-axis itself kept recalibrating as my data got closer together. You can see I'm actually looking at these more than my chart, because that tells me mathematically are my modeling factors the best they can be for factoring for all these differences. So as I change these factors, I'm watching this change right there. Again, I'm taking sort of a broad view. I'll zoom in on some of these things as we move along. When I'm done with my modeling step, you can see a little bit of some trends starting to emerge. It's still a little hard to see, and that's why we use smoothing. Smoothing allows us to really bring together all this data and really see where the true center of it lies. Now you can see relative to that line. That line just helps my eyes. Yes, over the long term, mostly because of prices being so high during the peak of the market in 22, it's sort of angling my line for like a 3-year downward trend in prices. Okay, yeah, prices are lower right now in this market than they were at the peak in 2022. Okay, that's fine. But really, I'm looking to see what's going on in the span of time where my comparables are going to be. This helps me to sort of track time periods that I experienced in my market, and I know what's going on, and it helps me to validate that, okay, yeah, this is really showing me what was actually happening in my market during that time. So this smoothing factor, how I choose that, we'll go into a little bit more detail. But now I can see sort of in a general sense that my market's been, fairly consistent, maybe a slightly downward trend. And then if I go back far enough, there was a little bit more of a dip. And then, of course, there was some trends that you can clearly see beyond that. This is helpful, but it's going to be more helpful when I actually segment this into charts, so I can look at each month individually and convert it into an index. So what I'm doing right here is I'm selecting a current score. The current score you can think of as a per unit price. It's a modeled per unit price. I've tried to strip everything out of market pricing except for time. Of course, that's impossible, but I've done it the best I can. And now we're going to take that and see what the calculations would be for moment to moment changes in time, and I can see that visually in this chart. So always where I declare that I am in my market at this moment is going to be 100. And that makes it really easy. When you base to 100, it makes a percentage very easy to see. So if I look at the peak of the market relative to where I am right now, it's around an index close to 110. That means the market at that moment was about 10% higher than current prices. So that's why that base 100 charting for indexing is super helpful. Below this, I have additionally a chart for days on market and sale list ratios. That also helps me to interpret where I am at this moment in time, and especially it's going to probably be very helpful as I even evaluate my current index. So I can see that days on market has generally tracked a little bit higher recently, and sale to list ratios may be slightly lower recently, but my trend line is slightly increasing there. Those don't quite match together, so that may be that I have some compositional changes in my market right there. So maybe it's not that if I look to compare a moment in time score wise. So if this is 197 in January and December, and in November and October it was 190, 194. Is that really just differences in the composition of how many homes sold during those moments in time that were maybe a higher proportion were remodeled, or other differences that we just weren't able to model for? So I would probably interpret this overall when I look at, again, there's another smoothing factor here, a centered rolling 3-month average we'll talk about. And again, I can see that was fairly consistent from the 194 type range, and then it ticked up. I don't, like I say, my interpretation is going to be that maybe this should be like 195. And so there's a formula in here, and I am encouraged to write over that formula. You're going to be, when you're using this, you're going to have a master copy that you're going to create a copy of every time, sort of a master template that you're going to create a copy of every time. And so it's okay to overwrite that formula. Again, me changing that is going to sort of change the chart a little bit on where everything is plotted. Again, it looks like things are really not fluctuating a whole lot. Were things maybe a touch higher in the spring? That's entirely possible, but it's definitely within the margin of error. And then if I have comps far enough back, there was really a more pronounced dip, which is going to be consistent with things that happened in the market during that time. You can see that was when there really was more of an upward trend in days on market, and that was a time that sale list ratios were declining. So that is consistent with what was actually happening in the market. So now I get to interpret. Okay, I have all the data. So let's just talk for a moment, and I'll talk you through my interpretive process. So I've looked at the scatter plot. I've looked at the chart with all the calculations moment by moment. I know how I've filtered, I've modeled, I've smoothed as best I can, but there's still going to be some variation in pricing that is going to be noise. So random variation, really it's compositional shift, and the fact that any given property is going to sell in a range of possible prices. So maybe a data point sold a little higher than it should have, or a little bit lower than it should have. Those are all random variations that we just can't do anything about, which is why we have to use our judgment. So if I'm looking just snapshot in time, year over year, if I just look at the index from 1 year ago relative to right now, it's going to say the market may have trended downward about 1%. Again, that's within the margin of error or the random variation. So these are all measures of variability. It's standard deviation that I'm using to help me see from month to month what is a normal level of variation that's not going to really, for the most part, be related to time. It's going to be just related to those random things that we can't always solve for. And so that helps me to almost establish a range of what would be reasonable. And so I'm going to conclude in this case, at least for now. So we can always revisit this after we look at our sales data. And what I'm asking myself right now is, it looks very consistently close to zero until I get back to July and early summer, late spring, or actually early spring even. They were all about 2% higher. Is that random noise, or was there actually a price change during that time? I'm also factoring into that interpretation what I know to be the case in other assignments that I've done. This isn't the only assignment that I've done in this market during that time. And I've seen, doing this process over and over and over again, that that early summer, the spring, has consistently tracked just a little bit higher. It's usually just maybe 2% higher. And so, yeah, that's within my range here. Might it be 1%? We don't know. We're getting to some fairly small numbers there, and that's okay. It's just going to make my analysis better when I am capturing a shift in the market that will help me to explain the variations when I'm looking at my comparables, and I'm trying to analyze them relative to my subject later. So what I'm putting here, doesn't go anywhere. My conclusions are just for myself right now. And so I might conclude on this one. I don't know how far back my comps are going to go. But I might conclude something like that. And what that's going to do is give me a starting place for those adjustment factors in my sales comparison. So I can go right now and apply these adjustments to my contract dates before I start my analysis. And what that does is it helps the rest of my sensitivity analysis of my comparables and my sales comparison. It helps that to be better because I'm not missing a variable that's changing and maybe trying to come back at the end, like that time residual that I mentioned, and try to find it at the end. If I can see that there's been a little shift at the beginning, then it makes everything else in that process easier. Now, might the magnitude change? Might I come back and say, well, 2% actually was a little bit low. Maybe it was closer to 2.5%, or maybe it was a little lower than that. Maybe it was 1.5%. So those are changes. They're all going to be within the supported range of that amount of variability that you're seeing in the market. But now I've got a lot of data which is backing up my conclusions, and my conclusions are consistent with what I'm seeing, and they're supported without something just telling me, okay, this is what you adjust. Would I want to just adjust a positive 0.7 adjustment there and a negative 0.5 adjustment there? No, that wouldn't really be super credible, because I wouldn't be considering that random variation in prices month to month. I'm drawing a big picture conclusion of what I believe the data is telling me. So, like I said, we were going to camp out on that interpretation piece, and we'll continue to move back to that. As you do that, everything up until the interpretation piece is going to move very quickly for you, and then you're going to have to stop and look. And especially if your data isn't quite as neat, this actually turned out to be pretty smooth data set here. You may not always have a data set that smooth, and that's okay. That just gives you more leeway to apply your judgment. And so that's the process for the second version of the techniques that are in this workbook. So we have our first technique that appears in the workbook is an InfoSparks-based technique. Second is the MLS modeling. That's what we just did. And so the next video, I'm going to do the same thing, a real quick walkthrough on how to use InfoSparks to get your data instead of the MLS.